All right, in this session, let's talk about the forms of improv in stand-up comedy. There are three forms of improv in stand-up, and those are riffing, crowd work, and dealing with hecklers. I'll explain each of those. Riffing is when you are talking off the top of your head and you are just making stuff up as you go. Crowd work is when you're talking off the top of your head, making stuff up as you go, but in an interaction with the crowd. And hecklers is when you're making stuff up off the top of your head in an interaction with the crowd, but you didn't start that interaction. And it's good to make the distinction between those three things because the way that you respond to them and the way that you interact in those situations is a little bit different. But we'll get into that in a little bit. First, let's talk about why the forms of improv and stand-up are useful. One is that when the audience understands that, or they think that you are talking off the top of your head, they give bonus points. It's easier to get laughs if the audience thinks that you're talking off the top of your head, if you're improvising. And it also feels, and part of the reason that you get bigger, better, easier laughs from the audience is that to them, it feels so much more connecting, so much cooler. The comedian is cooler because they seem more confident and smarter because they're making the stuff up as they go. And it's more connecting because the comedian is often talking with the audience. They're connecting with the audience if they're doing crowd work or talking to a heckler. And they are connecting with the situation generally if they're riffing. And so audiences really like that kind of thing. Another reason why improvising and stand-up is useful is that you can fill more time. Like, let's say you get booked to do a show for 30 minutes, but you only have 20 minutes. Well, you can fill a lot of that time by talking with the audience or riffing or, dealing with a heckler if a heckler comes at you with something. So it's easier to fill time that way. Another reason why it's useful is that you can actually generate more material. If you are riffing or doing crowd work or dealing with a heckler, you'll say things that you never would have thought of had you not been in that situation. And you can write that stuff down, work it into a bit later, or into an interaction that you have with the audience at a future point. Now, I bring up this idea that you can say things to audience members multiple times in different shows. It's not like it's always 100% made up every single time, although it is really useful to do that. It builds a muscle a lot better if you can improvise a lot. And you get more comfortable in that situation. It's super useful to do that. But it can be nice sometimes to have little things here and there that you can hit. You can get a laugh out of like a certain situation that comes up often at various shows. There are a lot of comedians who do that, famous comedians, successful comedians. And it just makes it a little bit easier for you to buoy those crowd work, those improvised moments with quality that you can get to. You've got these points of quality. It's also useful to, plan some things sometimes once in a while. If you want to eventually segue from the improvising back into the material, you can have an observation that is likely to come up. Like you comment on somebody's facial expression that is, a big smile or the opposite, right? There's always going to be somebody who's smiling. There's always going to be somebody who's not. And in the moment, it may feel like it's an improvised moment to the audience, but because it happens every time, you can use it every time. So that can be useful too. I don't recommend trying to plan out the entire improvised moment every single time because then you're not really getting practice improvising. Although, I don't know. I guess I haven't seen it done like that, but I guess you could. You wouldn't get a lot of practice improvising, so you wouldn't build that muscle. But it does still feel cool to an audience to see what looks like improvised moments, even if it's not improvised. So, I don't know. I guess that part is just up to your art, whatever you decide to do. Okay, let's talk about some of the key things to keep in mind when you are improvising in whatever form of improv that you are doing. These are some things that are really important to keep in mind regardless. When you're on stage as a stand-up comedian improvising, you want to keep your vibe good. We've talked about this in other sessions, but the vibe is huge. It's huge generally, but especially when you're improvising. That's what's keeping the audience feeling comfortable and staying with you. If you are strong in your presence, if you don't seem uncomfortable, if you seem confident and joyful or flirty or whatever mood you decide to go with, if you stick with it and you're strong in that, then the audience is more likely to stay with you. Vibe, very important. That also makes it easier for them to laugh at the jokes that you do say, right? That vibe keeps them happy, which is part of the goal anyway. And then when they're happy, it's easier for them to laugh. So vibe, keep it strong. Next tip, stay at the top of your intelligence. I said that the standards are lower, and that's true. When they're hearing what they believe is improvised, their standards are lower. But that doesn't mean that you should work less, because audiences have a way of subconsciously knowing when the comedian is phoning it in. So you really don't want to. You don't want to anyway, but especially when you are improvising, because you are trying to think of things off the top of your head. And so it's a little more challenging. And so why give yourself an extra handicap for that goal? So stay at the top of your intelligence. Keep thinking about what's next, what's next, what's next. What can I ask this person? How can I respond to this? Should I change the topic? Should I move on to somebody else, right? Stay thinking so that you can keep adding more. And as you add more, you'll be more likely to think of good punchlines that get a good laugh from the audience. And this, I guess, leads into another observation that you should know about improvising, is that the audience treats it a little more like a conversation. I mean, for obvious reasons, right? It feels more like a conversation. And when the audience is treating it like a conversation, they're expecting fewer laugh lines. If you give a lot of laugh lines, amazing. They're so impressed. But if you have a few sentences, you ask a question, you don't get what you want, you ask another one, you ask somebody else, etc., that's okay, as long as you eventually get to a laugh. Cool. Then, the audience treats that event as a success. Their standards have been adjusted to more of a conversational standard, as compared to if it was material, they would have maybe expected more punchlines along the way. So you are in an okay place. You don't have to worry if you haven't gotten to a laugh yet while you're improvising. Another thing that you can, and by the way, even if you don't get a laugh, don't bail out. This is the next tip. Don't bail out, all right? If you don't get a laugh, if you keep asking questions or something like that, and you're just not getting that response from the audience that you want, that big laugh, that's okay. Don't bail. It's all right to be out to sea without a paddle. Your confidence can propel you forward, okay? And just relax. If you are not getting a laugh, you can do a save about it, which I believe that we've talked about before. Show awareness to the situation. Keep that mood good in that awareness so that you're not making the audience uncomfortable in that awareness, but instead more comfortable about awareness that the thing didn't work out. And then maybe make a little joke about it if you can in that moment. So you got that save, great. You get a laugh off of that, excellent. Then you can move out of the crowd work portion or the riffing or whatever kind of improv you're doing. And it's more okay because you have gotten a laugh at the end of that through a save, which you can have planned ahead of time. All right. A save for an improv moment, you might be something like, I don't know, what that improvising lacked in humor, it more than made up for in length. So I think we're in a good place. Shall we get back to material? Excellent. I agree. Let's do that. Or you might say something like, well, geez, that improv went really well. And I'm not going for laughs, but I am going for talking more. And I did that, so it's a success. Or I wasn't trying to get a laugh. I was trying to teach you guys, and I taught you guys. Now that the teaching portion is over, let's get into the comedy. I mean, there's all sorts of things that you can say to show awareness, reframe the situation to make it feel more positive for the audience, and then move forward. And, it's not that big of a deal that the thing didn't work out before, okay? So, not a huge deal if your improv doesn't really work out the way that you want it to. Don't bail. You can segue out of it. You can do a save, etc. Oh, yeah, segue out of it. I guess I hadn't actually mentioned that. But you can segue out of it, and that is a super useful thing to do. Because sometimes, even if the crowd work, the improvising goes so well, the audience is just laughing so much, there will come a moment where you're like, okay, I'm ready to not be doing the improv portion anymore and get back into my material. How do I get back into it? This audience is like, they just want more crowd work, it seems like, and I'm out. I'm out of crowd work. What do I do? Well, a really good thing to do is then say something in that crowd work that has something to do with the material that you want to get into. And then you can just go into the material. Boom. You're invited to, because you've segued into it. It doesn't even feel like you're changing topics. It feels like you are moving in a smooth flow from the thing that you and the audience were talking about anyway. And one thing that can be really cool about that is that sometimes if you do this segue smoothly, if it feels like it arises from the audience and your interaction smoothly, then the audience doesn't even know that you've moved into material. And they think that this material that you've been testing and honing and making sure is really, really good, they think that is improvised. And so they give those same lower standards that we talked about for improv to this actually amazing material that you've been working on, and they think that you are just the most brilliant comedian in the world. It's a really cool thing that you can get sometimes. So segueing into your material can also be a very useful tool. Here's another tip for your improv. This is a tip that you can use at the very beginning, before you even go on stage, okay? Look at the audience, look at the stage, look at the setting, the backdrop. Think about like what has gone on before you go on stage, and what's happening outside that other people might have noticed, and see if you can think of something funny about that, like a little joke or a few jokes or a line for talking on a topic or a question to ask an audience member. And if you remember those in your set, don't try and like lead with them necessarily because they're on the top of your head and you don't want to forget about them, but just think of them before you go on stage. Think about them. And then, go back to thinking about what you're going to do in your act and stuff like that. And what that will do is when you're on stage, you may look at those things again, and then the thing that you thought of when you were off stage before you got on stage will pop back into your brain. And then you can say that thing that you thought of. And you don't have to think of it from nothing while you're on stage. It just pops back into your head. The memory comes back. You say it. Then the audience thinks, this comedian's brilliant. They just thought of this thing. So that can be a really useful tool. Just think of some jokes. Don't try to necessarily memorize them. And it's okay if you don't get to them during your set. But you may remember them during your set at an opportune moment, and then get major bonus points as a result of it. I guess this is more of a rule than a tip, this one, is don't come at every interaction with an audience with a metaphorical hammer, okay? These people they're nice people. They want to have a good time. They're there to have fun, and they like you, right? And so if they feel like you are picking on them, if you're bullying them, then that audience member who you are bullying could feel bad, and the audience around them could feel bad for that audience member too. And that doesn't reflect very well on you, the comedian. It depends on the kind of comedian you are. I mean, there are insult comedians who the audience understands that this is the kind of thing that they can expect. And so they're not going to feel like somebody is being singled out. It's more that like everybody is a equal opportunity victim in that situation. And that's a different thing. But for most comedians, if you are doing just regular jokes and then you pick on somebody who doesn't seem like they deserve it, they hadn't interrupted you, they weren't trying to steal the show, they weren't trying to ruin your set or anything like that, but you still bully them, then you can start to look like the bad guy and it's harder to dig out of that hole. So instead, treat this audience like a group of friends. And when you're joking with somebody, maybe tease like you would tease a friend, but you wouldn't get that mean with a friend, probably. Maybe you would, but there are ways that you cue that this person is somebody who you actually like, and definitely cue that to them. But, maybe you want to joke with them, right? Maybe you want to invite them in on the humor that you are then generating together in that crowd work. Or maybe you want to make self-deprecating jokes and invite this person to add another joke to that. Or you just want to make silly jokes that aren't actually very mean at all about anybody with an audience member. All of those are opportunities and more. You can think of others. But the point here is don't just be mean to everybody. These people are not out to get you. They're not your enemies. Don't treat them like that. They're friends. All right, let's talk about the little distinctions between riffing, crowd work, and hecklers and how to treat them differently. So when you're riffing, it is off the top of your head, and you want those lower standards from the audience. You want them to understand that you're making this stuff up as you go. But because you're not talking to the audience, it's not necessarily obvious that you're improvising. And so you'll need to cue to the audience that this stuff is not pre-written material, that they should not hold it to that higher standards, that you are making it up as you go. Okay, so you may literally tell them, this is not written material. I am just making this up. I'm just feeling this out. I'm just playing with a topic here. Let's see if it goes somewhere, right? And then the audience can understand that you're making it up, and they'll lower those standards for you. Or maybe you, and this can be a combination of things, maybe you make some commentary about the room or the specific situation so the audience understands that this could only be for this specific situation. You couldn't have written it ahead of time for other shows or anything like that because it's so specific to now. And then they'll understand that this is not honed material that they should hold to a higher standard. You can also do more implicit, like smaller signifiers that's unplanned, like talking but having pauses to think, or you're talking, and then you interrupt yourself with another thought, that kind of a thing. Lets the audience know that this isn't a monologue. This is something that you have kind of just are working out in your brain. Those little stutters, those little stops and goes moments tell the audience that you don't have a script. So we have talked about riffing and signifying to the audience that you are improvising in that riff, why it's important, and why you have to, because they aren't going to understand it necessarily unless you do signify that you're improvising. Now, with crowd work, this is an interaction with the audience. You don't need to signify to the audience that you're improvising because it's obvious. The crowd work is it's a bigger tool than a lot of comedians realize, because it signifies that you're having a social interaction. That's part of what the audience loves about it, right? And so knowing that, you may want to not just wait for big chunks. Like, this is the chunk where I do crowd work, right? In between doing this bit and this bit. You should look at your bits as social interactions with the audience on a certain level, And how can you signify to the audience that it is that, a social interaction? And so you may have questions that you can ask audience members throughout. You may have little moments where you acknowledge audience reactions, like you say something and then you look for an audience, like just really quick as you're going, you look for audiences' reactions, so you can be like, yeah, absolutely, that's what I'm talking about, and then move on to the next thing, right? Just these little like pops that remind the audience that you're there with them, you're listening to them. Audiences love to be heard, and so you can keep them engaged and feeling like it's more of an interaction between you and the audience and not just a monologue. Super useful. Okay, next tip. You may want to avoid asking the entire audience a question, because if you do that, then you are at risk of the bystander effect, where everybody thinks somebody else will answer and then nobody answers, right? That happens sometimes. And when that happens, it can read to the audience as a diminishment of the momentum, right? The audience might go like, oh, I guess we're not as enthusiastic as I thought we were before the comedian asked us all this question. You're way more likely to get a response if you ask one person. If you point that question at a single audience member, they know that that's for them, and so they feel obligated to answer. You know, some people are still not going to answer, and personally, I don't pry. If somebody seems like they don't want to interact with me, I'm not trying to, make them do that. I feel like it's a little harder to make that go well. If the audience feels like somebody's uncomfortable, the audience gets a little more uncomfortable. So I'm looking for the people who are into it, having a good time, who I might ask the question. You can ask an entire audience a question, but expect that maybe nobody answers, and then have something ready to go that you can say as a result of them not answering the question. You can make a joke out of that situation. And it's really fun and impressive to an audience when they feel like the comedian has predicted something or is really quickly reacting to something. And so it can feel like you've predicted an audience reaction or lack of reaction if you ask a question and they don't answer, or like you are, either predicting or reacting really quickly. And either of those very impressive to an audience. So you can ask a whole audience a question, but be ready for them to not answer so that you can say something clever after that. Okay, next tip is to repeat what the audience member said. Okay, you ask a question to an audience member, they say something, you hear it, but there's a good chance that a lot of the audience members didn't hear it. And so it's useful for getting them up to speed with the conversation to repeat what that audience member said. This also gives you a little extra time to think of something so that you can respond back. And, it's perfectly justified. It's not just a long pause, although you can have a long pause, but it's even more justified to repeat what the audience member said, giving yourself a little extra time to think of a response. Next tip, trust your reactions. So there is a tendency for us to self-censor, but when you're on stage in front of an audience, you're really going to want to censor that self-censor. Put that self-censor a little bit more off to the side. Scale back what you censor so that you're only censoring like the really bad thoughts, the thoughts that would be, turn the audience against you quickly, right? Make yourself more free to say things because there's opportunity afterwards. You can say a really dumb thought, or you can say something that's kind of insensitive or that breaks social etiquette, and those might be funny as a result of them breaking the social etiquette in various ways or being dumb or whatever. And if not, if it offends the audience, you can navigate that situation. You can say the next thing, right? That you didn't mean for it to be offensive, or that you meant it in a more flirty or whatever way. You can navigate the situation, and each of those moments can be a fun and funny moment. But if you stop yourself from saying anything, then you lose all of those opportunities, okay? So pull back that self-censor, let yourself say the things, and then navigate based on the reactions that you get to those things moving forward. And if you keep the vibe good, if you stay showing awareness, if you stay playful or strong in whatever performance you decide to go with, then the audience really respects that. They see it as a leader. They're more likely to have fun, and they're more likely to laugh at those situations. But you have to let yourself improvise if you want to improvise. Here's one thing that you can do if you've been improvising for a little while. If you've said things in the event of your improvising on stage earlier, then keep that in mind. Keep part of your brain dedicated to that, to making associations to that thing, so that later when you are talking to another person or you're talking about another topic, you can tie those things back. If you do callbacks to earlier improvised moments, the audience loves that. You get major bonus points for that kind of a thing. The audience thinks that that's just the coolest, like, very clever thing a comedian could do. And so, give yourself that bonus sometimes. It's not that hard to make associations between what happened earlier and what's happening now. And just keep a little space in your brain for getting those bonus points from the audience. You'll thank yourself later. Here's one note of caution, okay, about a certain kind of riffing or crowd work or improvising in general, is about how you're doing. If you feel like you're not doing that well in your improv, it's like I said, it's useful to show awareness. But if you are only showing awareness, but you don't pair with that the necessary booing of the confidence, like keeping that vibe good, then there is a strong risk of making the audience uncomfortable. And so you want to not just indicate comfort, but over-indicate, okay? Or confidence, or whatever the vibe is that you're going for. Over-indicate in that moment, right? And so if you think that something awkward happened, don't say, well, that was awkward. Say, that was awkward, right? Go over the top with it, right? If your mood is to be a relaxed person, then you might be like, that was awkward. Or if you're a flirty person, you might be like, I don't know how to do flirty. You might be like, that was awkward, right? Something like that. That wasn't as creepy as I thought it would be. So over-indicate whatever the emotion is that you're going for, right? If you are commenting about how you're doing and you think that it's not going that well, right? Over-indicate. And then another note of caution on that is that what's happening in your head is not necessarily what's happening in the audience. All right. So you may think that it's not going well, but the audience may be having a great time. Sometimes the audience just isn't that loud. Sometimes you are so in your head that you're not paying attention to the laughs that much, and you think you're doing worse and you're actually doing better. So, just be sparing with those kinds of comments, thinking that you're not doing well. And when you do them, be strong, show awareness, be playful, funny, whatever it is you're going for. Be strong in that mode. Okay, you may be thinking, crowd work, very useful. Where can I put it? And the answer is all sorts of places. You can put your crowd work at the beginning, at the middle, at the end of your material, in between material, all over the place. And it's useful in all of those places. If you put it at the beginning of your material, you can segue into the material smoothly, maybe get those bonus points because the audience thinks that it's improvised like we talked about. Or if they know that it is a segue, that it's contrived, that's okay too. They appreciate the polish of the comedian being able to segue into material from crowd work. They love that. If you do it in the middle of the material, you give it like this nice pop of social layer, for the audience and they like that. If you do it after the material, then you can add that social layer to the closure of that material and like get the audience feedback on it and get their thoughts and potentially come up with more material as a result of it. It's useful to do crowd work and to keep it feeling social all over the place. You'll want to gauge, right? And this is something that I think you'll probably do naturally, is if the material's working really, really well and the crowd work or the riffing or any kind of improv isn't working as well, you may want to scale back a bit on the improvised portion and just pronounce the material a little bit more, or vice versa, right? But it's really nice to have those various tools so that you can calibrate and lean more into the thing that's working. So definitely work on it, and you'll get better and better and better at these things over time, and you'll be able to have those strong tools that you can switch between when necessary.